right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our series with Heartland Workforce Solutions and 75 North. It's the My Career Story series. Today, we've got a really great person and professional here to talk to you a little bit about their career. So we're super excited that you're tuning in. As always, if you're joining us via webinar, please use the chat feature to ask questions. There's going to be plenty of time at the end to ask questions. There's also a Q&A feature as well if you want to use that, whatever works best for you. But as you have questions, please send them in. But I want to introduce you to our presenter today. And so not only is he a good tennis player, but he's also a pretty good doctor as well. So we've got a doctor, we've got a scientist, we've got a professor, we've got a tennis player. That's the perfect combo, right? So Dr. Apar Ganti, and let me tell you a little bit about his past. So he completed his residency in clinical pharmacology in India. He subsequently completed the internal medicine residency, medical oncology fellowship, and a master's program in clinical and translational research. He's the Associate Director of Clinical Research at the UNMC Fred and Pamela Buffett Cancer Center. He's got a lot of great research interest areas as well, so feel free to ask him about some of those. I won't describe all of those, but if you have questions, you can definitely ask about that. But we're super excited to have him talk a little bit about his journey, his education, his career pathway, what it's like to go through medical school, what it's like to be in Omaha, Nebraska. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Ganti and say thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stan, for that introduction. And thank you all for spending a busy Wednesday morning to hear me speak about my life. Not that it's great or anything like that, but they say serendipity is a lot of what factors into what you become. For example, a classic example is what I'm doing here today. I came to know Stan first when we were drawn together to play tennis at one of the local tennis leagues. And we got chatting while playing. I wasn't very good. He beat me pretty easily the first time around, but I got back when we met again. But we got talking about what I did, and I asked him what he did, and he said he did this thing where he partnered with folks who are interested in different career paths and had this my career story. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And then all of a sudden I get an email from him a few weeks later saying, hey, you'd be a great person. I didn't think of that because I thought my story was pretty boring, but apparently it's not, at least according to Stan. I'll take your word for it. And so here I am. So I have had an interesting long journey over the years, a journey that spanned 5 continents, about 20 years or so. Just as a background, I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in India, and middle class in India is way different from middle class here. I joke with my kids. In fact, funny story, over Thanksgiving, I had a few high school friends come over, and my son, I was picking him up from the airport. He is in college in LA. I was picking him up from the airport, and I told him, hey, a couple of my high school friends are coming over. And he said, how many? I said, 3. He says, do we have enough room in our house for all of them? I said, what do you mean? He goes, we just have 3 spare bedrooms. And I said, well, the house that each of us grew up in, if we added all of those together, it still will be about half the size of our house right now. And so he goes, oh, you guys lived in such a small house? And I said, yeah, that was what we lived, and we consider ourselves lucky. Just to give you a background, I grew up in a house that was about 600 square feet with 4 of us, my parents and my younger sister. And that was considered a big house at the time in India. So that's what middle class looked like in India back in the 1970s and 1980s. Another question a lot of people ask me is, when did you decide that you wanted to be a doctor? And that's a hard question because it's not one particular aha moment where I said, hey, I want to become a doctor right now. A lot of it had to do with some of the people I looked up over the years were growing up. My uncle, my mom's younger brother, was a pretty important figure in my life. He was about 12, 13 years, he's about 12, 13 years older than I am, still a person I talk to very often when I'm looking for advice. And as I was growing up, when I was about 5 or 6, he got into medical school. And I said, yeah, this seems to be a cool thing to do. And I lost he was not at home because he was in college and doing his residency and all kinds of things. And I said, this might not be a bad idea and a nice thing to do. And if you grew up in India in the 80s, you realize that there were only two professions. You were either a doctor or an engineer or a nobody. And that was basically what India was like back then. And to a certain extent, it is still today, but things have changed quite a lot. And so the answer to the question as to why I decided I want to become a doctor was because A, it was a cool thing to do, and B, it was one of the two accepted professions in India. Having said that, the journey was not all that easy. Unlike here, where you have a lot of second chances, again, because in the US, the number of people applying to a particular slot in a particular field is much less compared to what you have in India. So, for example, in order to get into medical school in India, you just had one chance. High school education in India is basically the same as here, first kindergarten to 12th grade. And you had two what we call board exams or high stakes exams, as you call it here. One was at the end of 10th grade, which basically decided which college you would go to for 11th and 12th grade. We don't have the 4-year college system in India that we do here. And so after 12th grade, you chose your professional career. It's right after high school in the US context. They're changing that now, and now I think there's a plan afoot to have 12 years plus 4 years of undergrad and then go into professional schools. And that might come in the next 3 or 4 years. But even today, you go to 12th grade, and after 12th grade, you decide what you want to do. And more than what you decide, it's decided for you based on the grades you get. So in 12th grade, you have about 50 or 60,000 high school kids appearing for this high stakes exam to get into back then, we had about 12 medical schools in the state that I grew up in. And so you had to be in the top 150 or 200 in order to get in. So not very competitive at all. And to add a wrench to the works there, it was not your total score that counted. It was the score in the three major subjects that are involved in medicine. I don't know how they came up with this, but said physics, chemistry, and biology. If your combined score in those three subjects was in the top 150 or 200, then you got into medical school. If you wanted to get into medical school, you got it there. So that's kind of the background of what this is. And so growing up, a lot of our friends, we did the same things as everyone else does here, just goofing around, studying a little bit, trying to do a lot of different things, trying to be involved in pretty much everything in school, like kids here. So I did some drama, which I was not good at. I did some public speaking, which I was okay at. And the one thing I knew I was good at was getting people to do what I wanted to do. I don't know how it worked out, but people, at least in high school, the friends in high school, maybe they thought I knew something, so they were okay with me telling them what to do. The case in point, in my 5th grade, I remember we used to have this inter-class dodgeball tournaments. And I didn't know what the hell that was. So one fine day, one of our physical therapy PE instructors comes and says, we need to get a dodgeball team for your class. And they announces in class and says, who's your captain? So, and people started shouting my name. And I didn't even heard what dodgeball, I didn't even know what dodgeball was. And here I was the captain of the team. And then the next thing I was the captain. And they said, okay, name a team now. I didn't know what was needed in that, but I took a few of the kids who seemed to know what they were talking about and said, okay, you are our team, without any practice and things like that. So people wanted to do what I told them to do, at least back then. Now, even my kids don't listen to me and they say I don't know anything, but that's a different story. But back then, that is what my childhood was like, just growing up, playing the fool, get home from school, play around with friends, do the bare minimum necessary to complete my homework, and then get done. And so I did those things. And one thing that I had, and I still am proud of it, is I had the knack of perseverance. And I think that helps quite a lot when you are interested in medicine. You don't have to be smart to be a doctor. You need to be perseverant, because it's not about how quickly you can think on your feet. It's how you continue to work forward through obstacles and things like that. And that's helped me quite a lot over the years. So anyway, I did reasonably well at school. They got through my 10th grade exams. And then when it came to the 12th grade exams, which was the high stakes exams, which decided whether or not I got into medical school. Remember, if you didn't do well in those exams, you were done. There was no second chance, because you were about the next year, you still had another 50, 60,000 kids applying for the same 200 spots. And if you didn't get your chance the first time around when you were fresh, there was no way on earth you were going to get it later. So it was a fairly high stakes thing. Yes, we had a few other national institutes which had their own entrance exams. And if you got in the first 50 or 100 there, then you could get into those specific institutions, which were not statewide, but this were more national. And let's face it, if you're not in the top 200, 250 in your state, you're not going to be in the top 100 in the country. So that was a distant dream. So we never even bothered thinking about it. Having said that, I gave those exams, didn't do very well at them. But thankfully, I got enough marks, decent grades to have a shot at medical school. But I wasn't sure if I would get in or not. So just as a backup, remember I told you the other accepted profession in India at the time was engineering. So interestingly, I had better, and that engineering admission was based on marks in physics, chemistry, and mathematics. And for some weird reason, I still don't know why now, I was better at math than I was in biology. So I had better marks in math, and I was guaranteed a spot in admission in engineering fields. So on the first day of the admission, I applied to both places since I didn't know if I would get into medicine or not. And so I ended up applying to engineering and got in there. And I said, what if I don't want this? If I get in there, I want to go there. And I said, yeah, you just cancel your admission here and some lucky guy will get it after you quit. And so I applied there, and then went to the medical school admission. They said, well, and then I think I was about 50th or 60th on the list there. And the list cutoff was somewhere around, it varied from year to year. At our year, it was somewhere around 75. So I wasn't sure. But in the end, I made it fairly easily. So that was, I thought I had it made when I got into medical school. But little did I know that the fun was just beginning. Again, in India, there's a lot of credence given to rote learning. You have to memorize things as opposed to practically apply them. That's the one big difference that I've seen between education here and education there. There, I knew all kinds of theory, not a lot of practical applications. Here, it's the other way around. Kids here seem to know a lot of practical applications without necessarily knowing the theory behind it. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it's just a different way of looking at things. There are pros and cons to each. So in medical school, I thought, hey, I'm great. Hey, I made it into medical school, so I must be really good. But once I got into medical school in the first couple of weeks, I realized that everyone thought like I did. Because remember, and we were supposedly the cream of the crop because we had made it past that exam into medical school. And one of our professors said, okay, you made it this far. We'll see how you do in your next test. And all of us were all very cocky, young teenage. We were 19. Yeah, I was about 18 when I got into med school. So cocky teenagers say, we're top of the world. We're the best in the world, so on and so forth. Only to find out in the first shelf exam, pretty much all of us failed. That brought us down to reality. Says, well, medical school is different from 12th grade, so we better suck it up and start studying. And that was about 4.5 years of medical school over pretty grueling, a lot of work, but a lot of fun. We made a lot of good friends over there, people who are still friends to this day. And we just had our class reunion Thanksgiving weekend. Unfortunately, I could not go because of family issues. But I saw pictures there, and a lot of us, out of a class of 210, about 130 showed up. So tells you about the camaraderie that we built over the 4.5 years. There was a lot of work, a lot of hard work. Again, your how clever you are did not matter. How much effort you put in mattered way more than that. And I think that's true for medical school here as well. It's not the smartest, but the one who perseveres the most tends to do well here. So medical school, again, after medical school in India, we have to do what's called a 12-month compulsory internship. It's different from the internship here because once you graduate med school here, you go into residency. The first year of residency is considered internship here. Out there, before you got your diploma, you had to do 12 months of rotating internship, 6 months of which were supposed to be done in a rural location. And 6 months were done in an urban location. And again, when we graduated from medical school, there was a group of us that wanted to be together. And so we chose the same institution that we trained in as 6 months for urban internship. And then all of us chose a place which was about an hour and a half bus ride away to do our rural internship. And I think that probably was the best 12 months of my life. In the rural internship part, I learned a lot about things that I had only read in textbooks. Did a lot of surgeries on my own, which I would never have done anywhere else. In fact, I did an appendectomy and a hernia repair on my own in internship. I don't think too many others would have done that. Of course, I had a lot of help from residents and attendings then, but that was fun. It was very, very exciting. One thing about internship that I did not like was my OBGYN internship. And I made a deal with the senior resident, the one who was supervising me. Says, if it's okay with you, I'll do anything you want if you let me stay away from labor and delivery. I don't want to deliver a single baby. I don't like it. I don't want it. I'm not going to do it ever in my life. I will do anything else that you ask me to do, including buy you lunch every day. And she goes, yeah, you don't have to do that, but you can take care of all the responsibilities on the ward, things like removing sutures, changing bandages, drawing blood for labs. I said, I'd love to do all of those things. Just don't ask me to do labor and delivery. And that was a pact that we had for the 2 months that I was on OBGYN. So that was fun because I had a great time with them, learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about the specialties that I was in, medicine, surgery, OBGYN, which helped me a lot when I went to my 6-month rural rotation in a small town, a village actually, where we had to stay overnight, and we were the doctors for that particular city, village, and villages around it. The problem with those rural health centers, they were health centers, and they had a few things with it, but they had limitations on what things could and could not be done. So, for example, there was a day when the pharmacist or the person who was the pharmacist over there come in and say, hey, we've got a lot of vitamins that will expire in the next couple of months. We need to use them up. Otherwise, we'll not get our next share of medicines. That was the rules there. And so basically anyone who came in that day with anything minor, even if he or she did not need anything, got a dose of vitamins, everyone was happy. The patients were happy because they got something, even though they may not have needed it. And they were not harmed because these were vitamins. The pharmacist was happy because they could then get their next supply. Because part of it was if you didn't use up what you had, then you were not going to get any more because you didn't need them. And that stupid rules in retrospect, but that was what was back then. So that was interesting. We had a lot of what we thought were pretty intense discussions about life in general at the time, what we would do in the future. And that was medical school, which brings us to what happens next. After medical school, like here, everyone goes into residency. And the way you get into residency is a little bit more complicated than here. Here, you pick a residency that you like, pick a place that you want to go and apply there. Unfortunately, there, if you were from that medical school, that university, you were eligible to apply for residencies only in that university. And again, you're competing against your entire class. And based on what your grades were in that particular subject, you got into that residency or not. And I always wanted to do general medicine, as internal medicine is called over there, because I felt that that was very broad and covered the entire body. And that was something that I was pretty passionate about during that. Unfortunately, I was told that I was not good enough based on my grades. We had about 8 or 9 slots, and I was about 12th or 13th on the list. So I said, okay, well, that's not going to work. So I gave this All India entrance exam, which had separate allocated seats in every government-run institution in the country at the time. And I got a spot in pharmacology. Pharmacology is similar, but not the same as what pharmacists here do. It's a 3-year residency in clinical pharmacology where you learn about mechanism of action of different drugs. You learn about how individual drugs act, what the structure activity relationship of the drugs is, meaning what if you change a particular molecule in a drug, how will that affect the action of that particular drug? So a lot of in-depth knowledge about various medications. And I think that helped me quite a lot. So I got into that. And then as part of that, part of the training that was a 3-year course. Part of the training for that included animal experiments and how drugs work in animals, which helped me a lot then. And I think in retrospect, helped me a lot in the research that I do today. So that was a very nice experience. Had a pretty strict mentor who was very by the book. And I think that helped me quite a lot in shaping my research career today. So I learned how to design experiments. I learned how to conduct experiments, how to record data, how to present data. All of those things were part of my clinical pharmacology residency, in addition to learning about drugs and things like that. So once I finished that residency, or as I was doing that residency, I always had this urge to get into clinical medicine, treat patients. And so I said, what are the options available to me? And that's when I realized about the USMLE and decided that what have I got to lose? I'll give this a shot and see how it works out. So I gave the USMLE in 1997. Most people do step 1 first and then do step 2. For international graduates, if you've already completed your graduation, it did not matter which step you did first. So I did my step 2 first in August of 97, and then step 1 in October of 97. If I look back today and wanted to do the same thing again, I'd probably give myself about 1 year at least to prepare for each step. I gave myself about 8 months to do both. Thankfully, I got a decent enough score, and then I applied for residency here. I knew that I was going to finish my residency over there before I came here. And so in 1999, I came here, applied for the match in 1999, did not get selected. So I said, okay, maybe this is not going to work out. But then thankfully, I had some friends here who said, why don't you try again? Why don't you give yourself some more time? Come here, do some elective rotations, get used to the system here, maybe get some letters from here, and that'll help you. I said, well, we'll give it another shot. If it works now, great. Otherwise, we've given it a good try. So I came back here in 1999, in the fall of 99. spent a couple of months at the Regents Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. Met a gentleman there, a cardiologist who was interested in cardiology back in India, and we saw a lot of different things that we don't see here. Rheumatoid heart disease, rheumatic heart disease is a very common problem in India. That's a condition where kids get infected by this streptococcus organism in childhood, and that affects their heart valves, and causes problems in adolescents and teenagers. And most people don't live beyond 30 or 40. And that used to be a big problem in India back when I was in med school. We saw a lot of rheumatic heart disease. And he was fascinated by that because he was an older gentleman and he had seen some rheumatic heart disease when he was in training. But as he moved through his practice, rheumatic heart disease was not a thing in this country. So he was fascinated by some of the stories that I had, and he told me stories of it. And it so happened that he was the former chairman of medicine at the University of North Dakota, talking of serendipity. And he said, you're applying for residency? I said, yeah. Have you thought about North Dakota? I said, North what? He says, North Dakota. I said, I don't know anything about it. And they said, you like that program? It's a nice program. Think about it. And I looked it up and I said, yeah, it's coming from India, everything was the same to me. The only knowledge of the US I had from India was Las Vegas and Hollywood. And so beyond that, everything was the same. If I was not going to get into San Francisco or Los Angeles or Las Vegas, I didn't care where I went. Didn't have too many family members here, so it doesn't matter. And so he said, you'd be a great person there. And if you want, I know the chair of medicine there. I know the program director. I can call them for you. I said, wow, this seems to be a gift from heaven, coming from India where no one did it. This was not frowned upon because there was no recommendation as such. Your only recommendation was your grades. And so I said, okay, yeah, if you're willing to do that, I'll be happy to. And so he called the program director and North Dakota and said, hey, you might want to look at this guy. He seems to know what he's doing. And based on his words, I applied to North Dakota, and that's how I got into residency in there. When I went to interview there, I liked the place. And when I talked to people even from Omaha, I says, how on earth did you end up in North Dakota? What did you like about Fargo? I said, well, it was a nice place. I went there in the fall. It was beautiful. People were very nice. And to be honest, I mean, I loved my time in Fargo. I spent 3 years in Fargo from 2000 to 2003. It was great. It was a good transition from India to not to a small town, which let me get used to this country, the systems, the driving, the hospital system. So all of those, I don't know if I would have done the same if I had ended up in New York or New Jersey or Chicago, but maybe I would have survived. So I did 3 years in North Dakota, and I learned a lot. I learned for the first time there that you needed to know more than medicine if you wanted to be a good doctor. And my program director, Jim Hanley, I'm in contact with him, remember him fondly. The first month he was my attending I was an intern, and he called me for his end of month evaluation. And he goes, well, you know your medicine, but there's one thing I want you to improve on. And I said, what? He says, you don't know any golf or football. I said, how does that matter? And he told me something that I still remember today. In order to build a rapport with patients, you need to speak their language. It's not enough to just treat them. Yes, you know your medicine, you'll treat them, they'll do fine. But in order to build a rapport with them, in order to get them to trust you, you got to talk about the things that they care about. And one of the things, he was a big golfer, so he talked golf a lot. And he said, Viking football is what people are passionate here about. And so you should probably learn that. Do you know who the Vikings quarterback is? Heck, I didn't know who the Vikings were. Forget quarterback. And so that's when I started taking an interest in football. And that helped me quite a lot when I came here, because the first thing I learned when I came here was that if you didn't know Husker football, people didn't care about you. So that helped me quite a lot. So I spent 3 years in Fargo, learned about internal medicine, did an internal medicine residency there. And then there came time for choosing what I wanted to do next. I, oncology or hematology oncology, which is what I'm doing right now, was probably one of the most upcoming fields in medicine at the time. Lots of new changes, lots of things were happening on the research side. Nothing had come into actual medicine clinical practice yet, but there was a lot of potential. And more importantly, people still felt that oncology was an area where you went, patients, once they got cancer, died, and there was not a whole lot you can do about them. So there was not a lot of interest in getting into oncology because it was, quote unquote, a dying profession. People were more interested in cardiology because, yeah, you could fix patient would come in almost dead, and you put a stent in their heart and they're live and uh, back to usual self within a week. Or you did critical care medicine where there's a lot of action, you did a lot of procedures, you potentially could save a lot of patients. But oncology was a kind of patients die. So I figured, well, that would be an interesting challenge. And that's how I went into oncology. And so I applied around the country, interviewed in multiple places. And one of those places, obviously, here was in Omaha at UNMC. And when I came to interview at UNMC, I found that this was fairly laid back place. Some of the other places, this was one of my last interviews. And so I had been to other places where they were pretty serious about what they did, and they had pretty rigid structures of where the fellowship was and what are you expected to do, what opportunities you have, and so on. And when I came here, the program director at the time, Dr. Phil Bierman, I don't know if any of you know him, but he goes, well, we're fairly laid back. We want you to do these 4 or 5 things, and beyond that, you can tailor this fellowship to pretty much whatever you want it to be based on what your future plans are. And I said, I can actually choose what I want to do. I said, that sounds nice. And so I asked him, when can I expect any info? When can I expect an answer from you guys? Because back in the day, we didn't have the match for fellowship. So you went and applied. If they liked you, they offered it to you, and then you had to decide whether you wanted to take that or wait for something else. And so I already had a couple of offers from other places. And so I told Phil, hey, I know you are still early on in the interview process, but I have a couple of deadlines that I have to meet. I like this place, but if you say I'm going to take another month or so to get back, I have to let others know. And I'd rather take a spot rather than wait. And he says, let me think about it. And that was the end of that. Next morning, I get a call from the coordinator and says, Dr. Bierman wants to talk to you. I was still in Omaha in my hotel waiting to check out. And Phil calls me and says, hey, if you want the job, it's yours. I said, wow, it didn't take you more than 24 hours to make that decision. I said, wow, if this place really wants me, maybe this is where I should be. And that's how I landed in Omaha. So I came to Omaha. As you all know, the Buffett Cancer Center, or the Epley Cancer Center, was known then, was world famous for leukemia, lymphomas, and bone marrow transplant. And so, like everyone who comes to Omaha for an oncology fellowship, said, hey, I want to do a bone marrow transplant down the road. So I started fellowship here. About a year later, they figured I knew enough and they would like to keep me on for a job. And so the chief of HEMONC at the time, she's still my boss now, Dr. Vos, she called me and said, well, we've been talking among the faculty and we would like to offer you a job if you're interested. And I said, okay. Says, what area do you want to specialize in? And I said, bone marrow transplant, because that was the one thing that Nebraska was known for. And she says, well, actually, we don't need too many transplanters right now. Can you think of something else? I said, okay. And then this brought back to me, reminded me of a conversation that I had with an attending back in Fargo when he asked me, what are you interested in doing? I told him oncology. And he said, oncology. Why? People die there. I said, people die everywhere, but there's a lot of happening things over there and a lot of things that are potentially exciting that would come in the future. And he says, yeah, I'll believe that when that happens. The most common cancer in the world is lung cancer, and most people with stage 4 lung cancer do not live for more than 6 months. And that kind of stuck in my mind. And so when Julie asked me what I wanted to do if not for transplant, I said, I'll do lung cancer. And that's how I became a lung cancer doctor. And so as I started my career here, I started off partly at the VA and partly at the university. The reason for that was because of my visa, my J1. I was on a J1 visa, which is an exchange visitor program for training. And as part of that J1 visa, you have to go back to your country for 2 years, or you have to serve in an underserved area for 2 years before you can get your green card. And I looked around in India to see if I could go back, but I found that my opportunities were much less, primarily because I was out of the system for about 6 years. And so, I was behind by 6 years. My colleagues and contemporaries had already established thriving practices there. And I would have to start all over from scratch, probably start off in a remote village or remote part of town where access to chemotherapy medications may not be as easy. And so I said, well, maybe it's time to just find a waiver job here. And interestingly, the VA offers a waiver position. And that's how I landed up at the VA. Started there in 2005 and have been there ever since. Over the years, I've done a fair amount of work in lung cancer, looking at various aspects of lung cancer and from a clinical perspective, from patient care. One of the things that we found out was that if women with lung cancer take hormone replacement therapy for menopausal symptoms, we found that those women did worse than women who did not take hormone replacement therapy. So that was one of the few things I'm very proud about the research work that we did. That was part of it I had done when I was in Fargo. I used to spend Sunday evenings looking through old charts, trying to find out which women were on hormone replacement, which women were not, trying to find out when they were diagnosed, what they were diagnosed with, etc. So that was a study that we published in, I believe, 2006 or 2007. And speaking of serendipity, that brings me to another story related to this project. So when we do these research projects, we usually want to present this at a national meeting so that people come to know about it. And at national meetings, the American Society of Clinical Oncology is probably one of the biggest organizations in the world. And that meeting usually attracts about 40,000 people. And so I submitted this abstract to that meeting and was told that the abstract was accepted to be presented as a poster. I said, okay, good. I mean, I got a national presentation. So I had my poster there, and there was this older lady standing next to me. And she comes and looked at my poster and says, interesting work. I said, yeah, thank you. And I walked her through what we had done. And she says, where are you thinking of publishing it? And I said, I don't know. Says, why don't you try submitting it to the Journal of Clinical Oncology? So the Journal of Clinical Oncology is the premium journal in oncology. Today it's the second or third ranked journal in oncology. Very high, very reputable. I knew about it then. I said, will they even look at it? She goes, you never know. Why don't you try it? I said, what have I got to lose? I mean, I'll send it. The worst thing they can say is, sorry, we're not interested. And so I sent it there. The next thing I realized is that the way they do it is they send it out to various editors, and some editor picks up the manuscript for handling. And what that means is they then send it out to reviewers who comment on it and then comment. And the editor who handles the paper has a lot of authority on what they want to do with that manuscript. And it so happened that the editor who took responsibility of that paper was the lady I spoke to. I had not known anything about this before. And so I just happened to know her name. I didn't even know who she was at the time. And so when I looked at the name and said, oh, she this Dr. Shaler has agreed to handle your manuscript. I said, interesting. Maybe that's why she wanted me to send it there. And so that's in that journal. I would never have thought about submitting it to that journal if she hadn't told me. And so submitted there, it got published, it got a lot of reviews in it. And so that's another example of just being in the right place at the right time. So I've done some animal work, some animal research, some basic science research. And that again was serendipity. The chair of biochemistry here, basically we were talking about something unrelated. And he goes, we are meeting outside and he says, okay, what do you do? I said, I do lung cancer. Are you interested in research? I said, yeah, that's what I'm in academic medicine to do. And he goes, well, we need to talk. And then that was the start of a beautiful collaboration that goes on to this day, which helped me build up some laboratory work, some preclinical work, looking at molecules, pathways that are important in cancer formation, and that will help understand why people develop cancer or what are the pathways involved in cancer. And that's some of the work that goes on to this day. So that's, again, if I had not met that person at that meeting, I would not be doing what I'm doing. So there's a lot of serendipity involved in my career, like most other careers. And as time passed, since I've been a fixture here, I've been assigned more and more responsibilities. And part of my work that I do today as the Associate Director of Clinical Research for the Buffett Cancer Center is to direct clinical trials for cancer patients, oversee the conduct of clinical trials across the institution. And that's part of my most recent responsibilities. What we do there is we have a team or an office which is responsible for clinical trials within the Buffett Cancer Center. We have 2 managers, about 15 nurses, about 10 non-nurse research coordinators, about 12 individuals just to enter patient-related data into the appropriate systems. And we've been able to grow that division, that office, from about 15 or 20 back in 2014 to about 55 individuals today. So that's one of the other things that I'm proud of on the administrative side. So I think I bored you enough about my story. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Sure. Oh, well, they did about what was expected of them. But they could have done better with a better offense.
So my question first was kind of with the difficulty of your job, obviously you're seeing a lot of difficult situations, a lot of hours and things like that. What are some of your coping mechanisms to actually use when happening to doctors and all that?
So one of the things that I found out when dealing with cancer patients is you would think that when they're having cancer and facing the end of life, they would be depressed. But that infusion room in the hospital is probably the happiest place there could be. It's almost like these patients saying, okay, I need to make the best of whatever days I have remaining. And it is, we do a lot of joking around. We do a lot of banter with patients. In fact, I had 2 patients this morning, both wanting me to tell them that they were my most favorite patient. So we have a lot of joking and banter with patients, and I think that's a very good coping mechanism. You would think that patients would be depressed, upset, sad. There's an initial part right after their cancer diagnosis where they are upset and you need to hold their hands quite a lot. But as time passes, they move through their cancer journey, they seem to be resigned to the fact, and actually they're much more upbeat about it. And so that is one of the coping mechanisms. The other coping mechanism that I have found is once I leave work, I tend to forget about patients. It might sound callous, but that's the one way I found that I can come back the next day fully rejuvenated and try to give the best to my patients. So that's the way I find it. So like I do a lot of other things, tennis, for example, even though I'm not very good at it, I play a lot. I've started doing some pickleball. which again, I'm not very good at, but I play around. And so those are kinds of things I read. They have this website called chess.com where they have chess puzzles every day. I try to solve them, try to beat my records every time. So I'm a reasonably competitive person in that setting, as you may have figured out. Sure. A health profession? It is fun. It is very rewarding, but it is a lot of work. It takes a long time. So, for example, medical school in this country is 4 years. After that, depending upon what residency you want to do and what subspecialty you want to do, it could be anywhere from between 3 and 7 years after that. So you're looking at not starting earning till you're about at least 30. So you need to plan out for the long haul. It's not instant gratification. That's the one advice that I have. But it is extremely rewarding. Every time a patient comes and tells me, either I feel so much better today or you saved my life, it's almost like you feel like an imposter. What have I done? I mean, everything, I just told them what any oncologist or any doctor would have told them, and they did better. I don't know what made them better. I think they got better on their own with some help from me, but they tend to give me the credit for it. That is a very overwhelming feeling. It's a very nice feeling, but it is sometimes you feel they really deserve this. So those are very, very rewarding moments. And those are when you ask me about coping mechanisms, some of those words that patients say is what gets us through some of the bad days that we have. It's a lot of hard work, but a lot of perseverance, but it's fun at the end.
Is there a different approach to challenges than your other peers? How do you approach things that are like adaptive in environments that are different? What advice would you give colleagues in general?
So one of the things that training in India and working for my formative years in India has taught me compared to here is things are so much better here. And humans tend to complain. And so it's a matter of perspective. When you put things in perspective, you realize how things are different here, how much better things are here compared to what things are back home. One of the things that I did not tell you was in residency in India. Thankfully, I didn't have to go through a lot of it, but people work about 120, 140 hours a week. Especially if you're a first year resident or what we call a junior resident or a JR, they get maybe 12 hours off a week. They're pretty much on call the rest of the time. They live on campus. They're woken up at all hours of day or night. And so once you've been in a situation like that, when we talk about the 80-hour work week and not more than 24 hours at a time, which is the current rules here, it seems like a piece of cake. So it gives you a different perspective of how things are, tends you don't complain as much. At least I try not to complain as much. I complain as much as anyone else, but sometimes at the back of my mind, it says, okay, you remember you've been through this. Now, compared to that, this is nothing. So you better tone down. So that helped, that perspective. The other thing is the facilities and the resources that are available here. I complain here when if I needed a blood drawn at noon and it's not done till 1:30 or 1 o'clock or 1:30. Out there, if I needed a blood drawn at 12 o'clock, I had to do it myself. Otherwise, it would not be done. So that's the difference. Here, I can be sure that it'll be done at some point. So those are little things, but they matter a lot when you're living them day to day. So that's a different perspective that I have. Also, patients are pretty much the same everywhere. I have this saying that people tease me about. It says human beings are the same no matter what part of the world they come from or the way they live. It's just that their circumstances make them think a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, they all think pretty much the same way. So patient experiences, the patient responses, either gratitude or anger are similar both here and back home in India. Sure. Mhm.
So obviously we're not preparing physicians. But your medical assisting, your nursing, CNA. I'm just wondering, like, maybe the variety of we talk to our students a lot about their many entries into the health. Like maybe in your department, what variety of degrees do you see in your employees?
So we see all kinds of degrees, but the various groups that we have, like a clinical research associate or a clinical research coordinator, they could be any master's degree with many health background, and they could come in at an entry level and work their way up the chain. So nursing obviously is a specialized degree. We have to have a nursing degree for that. But for data coordinators, for clinical research associates, clinical research coordinators, they're basically masters in any scientific degree with a health interest and health background. So there's a lot of that. We have also what we call regulatory coordinators, or people who are in charge of making for clinical studies that we do, filling out the regulatory paperwork, working with the institutional review boards, working with other regulatory authorities. Again, a master's in a biologic field would be more than enough. And these are all fairly good jobs. The research associate is more of an entry level job, but one of the things that we do is we don't want anyone who treats that job as a dead end job, as the final job. We want people there who come there to gain experience and do other things. For example, we've had CRAs who come in and have gone on to do nursing, gone on to medical school, gone on to do clinical research coordinators, gone on to do masters in other things. So yeah, so there are lots of different uh, opportunities for anyone with a basic degree in in science or biologic fields. So there are lots of opportunities, and in fact, we are always looking for people, because that's kind of like a revolving door, that office. So we have a decent amount of turnover. Most of it is something that we like, because we feel that they come there, gain the experience, and go on to something better. The nurses obviously are terminal jobs, but others, there's a lot of movement there, and we would like more brighter students come to us for that, gain some experience, gain some money, and then earn some money and then go out. And a lot of these jobs pay around 50,000, somewhere between 45 and 50,000 a year plus benefits.
If you were in school years, what advice would you have for someone in that position like myself?
So the most important thing, for good or for bad, is your MCAT score. Once you have an MCAT score, that's the cake. Everything else is icing on the cake. So things that you could do to help boost your CV is, number one, be true to yourself. Is it something you want to be doing? Yes, there's a lot of glamour in medicine. People look upon, even today in the society, doctors are looked upon quite highly. But there's a lot of hard work that goes beyond it. It's another 8 to 10 years. You need to commit to yourself to put in that effort to do it. Once you know that that's what you want to do, I would recommend shadowing physicians, trying to understand what they do. Again, learning if this is what you want to do. Because I've had some kids come and say, I'm very interested in medicine. And the first sight of blood, they faint and say, this is not for me. Obviously, not a good fit. And true story. I mean, I'm not making this up. But you need to be sure that this is what you want to do. Shadowing in ERs, working as a scribe in ERs, doing some research always helps. Like a lot of students take a gap year to do research at in one of the labs, work on something that shows that you are committed to this. What that also does is bolster your CV and reconfirms your interest in that subject. So those are the big things that I would. But if that the basic thing, if people, a lot of people still look at is the MCAT score. Uh-huh. I'm fine, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So medical schools can be expensive, no doubt about it. I mean, they pay in the long run, no questions. I've not yet seen a poor doctor. But from a scary perspective, yes, it is scary because, again, it's like this big, bad area, this huge thing where we don't know anything about. And at the end of it, we are expected to be curing patients. And so that's scary in a way because it's a lot of responsibility. But you have to realize that there are a lot of safeguards in place. Every medical school, both UNMC and Creighton are prime examples. They have a lot of safeguards, a lot of backup plan, a lot of help to help students get over their fears and be successful. In fact, I've talked to some of the senior people here. They kind of complain about the amount of help and amount of support there is for students nowadays. That if you are interested in doing it, they will not let you fail. Yeah, it's a different story that if you don't care and don't want the help and don't want to do it, that's a different story altogether. But if you care about it and if you want to do it, there are enough help support systems in place that you will not fail. And that's true for both institutions in this city, and I think for most institutions in this country. So I would not worry about that one bit. Yes. Yeah, it's obstetrics is one thing that most medical students, either you love it or you hate it. There is no in between. Nothing against them. I mean, they do a great job. I mean, I respect them a lot. It's not something I would do. No, I think, I mean, if I had to do this all over again, I would do it. I would not change one bit.
We'll thank Dr. Ganti here for this. We'll be back again pretty soon, very soon. Actually, we've got some events for 2024 planned, and so look for that on social media. We'll be announcing some really great upcoming My Career stories. But thank you for joining us, and thanks for those questions, and we'll see you next time.